Hello, in this video you'll see how to use the Stripe.net specifically as SDK in .NET Blazor, in this case Blazor server side, but we will be utilizing the minimal API arrangement specifically just to handle the webhook arrangement, which comes quite useful if you only have a Blazor server side and you need to handle some payments. We'll cover how to create the checkout session and the sort of intricacies of that, how to arrange a few different options there. But essentially we have this little simple example, and you can click buy now, and then it will redirect you to a checkout page. It will kind of catch your location. You can switch them around, and you can add a few more other options as well. And depending on the region, as you can see right here, you can set different options, and otherwise it will be provided. So it's a very useful sort of arrangement in .NET, especially very straightforward to handle. The webhooks can get a bit complicated, but Stripe does offer their own a sort of CLI arrangement to handle them. So it's all relatively straightforward. In general, it's Blazor Server. And then you have your minimal APIs just to handle webhooks, to handle all those payments. So now let's jump into the code. Let's look at the checkout setup process, and then we'll take a look at how you can set up the keys and webhooks in the actual Stripe dashboard, and the CLI arrangement as well for the webhook redirects to your own browser, or to rather your own computer. So let's go into that. Now, to actually make it all work, you'll just need one simple NuGet package, which is stripe.net, nothing more. Perhaps we'll have a few videos after this covering subscriptions and things like that. So additional packages may be involved there, but not Stripe packages, just something to help you actually handle the sort of load and jobs to recreate those usage limits and all those things. But as far as actual Stripe goes, you only need the stripe.net, and that's it. It's well developed. It's obviously quite popular. There's quite a few downloads here, so it's definitely there, and it's well supported. So that's perfectly fine. Now, in order to get started, we can go to our home.razor. In this case, you saw that page in the beginning. We have just a few items, but essentially this one we handle by the item ID. Now, sometimes you'll handle it by item ID, by user ID. You'll see later on where we actually send the data to. It's kind of an interesting arrangement how you can send user ID, for example, and then retrieve it once the payment is actually confirmed, because we only care about the payment. That's kind of an important step there. Just a few design arrangements here, nothing to worry about. Essentially what we care about is this checkout. So once the user clicks that, we have the product ID, and we create a checkout session. That's a Stripe checkout. So at that point, Stripe handles everything. Now, there are variations, and you can use products. You can actually create the Stripe API or do it manually and create products via Stripe, which would be perhaps more reliable with prices and whatnot. But if you have lots of interchanging products and things of that nature, you would still need to handle it manually. So it depends on your preference whether you want to use that or not. But one thing to say, if you do create products, and we'll cover this in upcoming videos, how you create products, but you can use coupon codes. Of course, here you can do that as well. You can pre-apply them. It becomes a bit more tricky when you have the ones created on Stripe. You can actually pre-apply a coupon code, but then you can't allow user to set one, or You can allow users to set one once they are in the Stripe checkout, but you can't pre-apply one. So it becomes a decision whether how much control you actually need and whether you want to handle it on your own or not. But the simple thing here is you get your product ID, you get your product setup and whatnot, and you pass all the data, and you take care of all the necessary bits in between. And then you use this method in the Stripe checkout, which is a custom method, right? It's in this code. We'll look at it in a moment. But essentially, what you want to get in the end is this checkout URL. So the checkout URL will redirect you to the Stripe URL with all the necessary data. The important thing is to pass the necessary data, enough of it, so that the webhook that comes back to your own platform has enough data to sort of figure out who ordered things and who did what and how and when and what the price was and how to apply it to the actual user. So in this case, we're kind of simplifying it. We just have a product ID and a quantity. But we also need the redirect URI, so those redirect things will come in handy, obviously, on success or cancel pages, kind of simple arrangement. But we do need to pass some data, and usually you would also pass a user ID. We're simplifying it a bit, but the user ID is important because then you can apply to the user ID. Again, it's a bit simplified now, but essentially the main thing here is to get that checkout URL and to pass all the necessary data to create the whole arrangement in this create session sync, which is our custom method. It's not a Stripe method. It's not from Stripe arrangement. It will have a Stripe arrangement which will produce the checkout URL. And from there on, you redirect to Stripe, and it will handle everything in between, and then you just have to confirm it via your webhooks, and it will also do the redirects based on your redirect URL. So now let's take a look at that create session to create the whole session page. For the API keys, it's very easy to find. Oh, it's a bit hidden, but you do have this developers sort of a whole taskbar. So you go to developers, and then you quite simply go to API keys, and then you get your API keys revealed for this whole arrangement. Relatively simple arrangement. You copy the publishable key to your app settings, or, well, it should be a bit more of a secure storage, probably for your releases, for your actual production, and then you copy the secret key. So that is the setup for the API keys. And now let's get to the webhook setup, which is a lot more trickier. So the checkout service here has the create session async method. Nothing else it has actually. Again, it's quite straightforward. All it comes down to is just getting the product, the right product, and then also getting the user ID or the cart ID perhaps. That's why we don't really have that additional thing, because you might have your user ID, you might have a cart ID, you might have a company ID that's buying it. So that's where all the customization happens. But it's important to always think about it, right? So you should never trust AI tools or anything like that. This is the part where you do it yourself. You have your best professional on the case, because this is the most important thing. So you start from here, and then you end with the webhooks. So whatever it is you're passing here, usually it might be a user ID or one of those things, but that's going to be verified in the webhooks. That's the important thing. Now, the other important thing is the API keys. After this little bit, we'll take a look at the API keys and also the webhook key. There's only one. In that regard, it gets a bit more tricky, but those are the things you need to be careful about. Everything else, you can change the design of things, and of course, there's tax options and things of that nature. Depends on the region you set up. And obviously, Stripe now is available in all kinds of regions, not like a few years ago. So it's something to think about, of course, but for your actual domain security, it's very important to verify what you create here and what you retrieve in your actual webhooks. So let's see how you can create the checkout URL. First of all, in this case, we verify that the product exists. Again, you will verify perhaps that the cart exists, perhaps that the user exists, perhaps that a company exists. All these verifications need to happen before you even create an order, because even if someone pays, you'll need to verify those same things on the webhook side. So you create this, someone pays, and then your application will receive a sort of notification, if you will, right, on the your exposed API endpoints for the webhook. And those same pieces of data, they will have to match on the webhook. Very important, and you need to do it very carefully. Now, the setup in general perhaps isn't too complicated. It gets complicated in places, but that is something to remember. That's very important. And then we can create an order. So this is just our own piece of data, nothing Stripe related, nothing fancy, just in memory table. And this you can have it in your own table, whatever it may be. Postgres, SQL Server, maybe MySQL, or whatever database you use. It doesn't matter. It's not related. You just need some IDs. It doesn't matter where you save it. Stripe doesn't care. You care about it. Now, we do have some videos about various databases. Some are better, some are worse. Probably when you have an eShop, Postgres these days is one of the better options for licensing and all that. But take a look at the other videos on this channel. Now, the main thing to actually create the checkout session is the session create options. So there is going to be an action to create it, but we almost don't care about that because that's the easy part of code. What we do care is creating a product. And as mentioned before, you can actually create a product directly in Stripe, and we'll probably make another video this week or next week about that because it will be a bit different. This is completely custom. That will kind of come from Stripe directly, and in some ways it may be easier, but obviously if you have an online store-ish kind of thing, if you do have one, you'll probably be on Shopify or some of those platforms, so you're not interested in that sort of arrangement. But if your products are changing constantly, you just probably want your own thing, and you'll do it like this. If not, if you have a set price, and especially with subscriptions, we'll try to cover again in this week or next week. You'll have a product created directly in Shopify, so you just sort of fetch the product and price information, which is not exactly easier than this. You still need to pass the data and fetch all those things. It may actually be more difficult than just simple session line item options. Now, whatever you put in here in these session line item options will be part of that sort of predefined invoice, if you will. In the checkout, your user will see whatever you put in this little list, this array, and that's what they will pay for or not, depending if it works or not. So price data and quantity. The main thing in general, Stripe has a a product arrangement. This is what you have in session line item options. That's sort of a product. If you create a product in Stripe, that will be more or less a product. Of course, there will be a different arrangements if you have an actual product created in price, but in Stripe, but session line options is sort of that thing. But then also Stripe has price data. So product and then goes price. So we have a line item and then we have a price data. And as you can see, the price data is much more sort of wider scale than the actual product itself. We just have a quantity and whatever the price is for whatever it is, and then we can put in the product data in the price data. So it is perhaps a bit confusing, but that's how it works, and it's something to adhere to. And if we look just quickly here, we don't have sort of much going on here, but we won't look at the price. We have a price data. We don't use that. We always go for a price. And as tax rates, you want to go into that as pre-applied usually. And if you need to handle that, that's going to be in the options and session options. Although you can apply tax rates for specific arrangements, you can create them directly in the Stripe dashboard and apply them. The best thing to do is set up your company correctly and do the auto tax. Whatever country Stripe supports now, they do support the auto tax. So that's just a better way to go. The most interesting thing, however, here is this metadata section. So for different products, perhaps you want to add a little a different arrangement. Perhaps you have a bonus add-on to be had when someone is purchasing one of these items during that period of a quarter, month, a year, a week. If you have those sort of very specific discounts that don't necessarily apply to price, but you have just an additional thing, you might want to add that, or you might want to add some additional thing in that regard. And this is where it becomes very useful because they do allow that. So session line options and just in general for session, you can add this metadata arrangement, and again, that helps for general tracking and customizing and all that. The image URL you can add if you want, kind of a useful thing if you're doing everything dynamically. If you're just creating a product via the dashboard, you can do that directly. But here, of course, just make sure it's working and it's sort of appropriate kind of an image for the sizes and things. Because Stripe will adjust it and it will make a mess of things. So in that we have a product description, name, just general sort of product data. And if we go just a bit here, again, we have the metadata for the session line items, but we also have for the product itself. So if you have the whole setup, and you can unify it and map it with your custom data, so you can make it completely custom as such. If you want to apply a coupon code and you want to make your own fully custom system for a bunch of products, perhaps direct sales, perhaps negotiations of some kind, or perhaps just some advertising arrangement, you can certainly set up for that as well. So there's plenty of things to handle. Now, the metadata where it becomes quite useful, maybe the previous one in some cases might be useful as well, but in general, we will have the order ID, we'll have a product ID. Now, the order ID can be associated to user ID. If a certain user creates that order ID, then we just verify the order ID, and on the webhook we will be verifying that it is in fact the order ID that was paid for and was paid by that user because it's associated with that user. So then we don't kind of need to handle the user ID. But in general, it would probably be good to add either a company ID or a user ID. Now, it depends how your accounts are set up, in what they are set up, and how you handle it. But that metadata needs to be checked. And again, this is not something that's sort of by default. This is not something you should probably give away to AI tools or your junior developers. So something to be handled very, very carefully, because it's very easy to break, and you don't need hackers. You don't need some bad people to break it. It can be very easy mistake, and you will have a tough time figuring out what went wrong, why some payment didn't work, and was it something stolen or not stolen, and it can go wrong quite quickly. So again, as mentioned previously, important to watch out for these things. What's being provided in the checkout session, and then what's being verified on the webhook side. Other than that, we provide the success and cancel URL. So those are redirect URLs. If payment is successful, it will be here. And if someone says back to the page, cancel this, they'll go to your cancel page. This one isn't all that necessarily interesting, but this one can be quite interesting, because on that actual page you can verify, do a sort of double verification. At that point, it will probably just be in your direct database, because the hook comes enormously quickly, so there's nothing to worry about. Although a quick double check, or just wait 5 seconds and then recheck, sort of ping the server, that might work as well. Now, the other thing, nothing too sort of fancy. We kind of go out of bounds after this. Have customer creation, yes, if needed. This will essentially create a customer for you in the Stripe. If required, is usually the option. You don't want to be going mandatory on this, but usually it will be created, because Stripe creates a customer with credit card information and whatnot. You cannot see the full credit card information. That's the beauty of Stripe. It handles all the privacy stuff, but that it will essentially create this customer, and you'll be able to do a quick refund and whatnot. The billing address and some other data is a bit of a separate topic. The billing address collection, yes, we can do that, but there are options to also collect the company data. You might just do private, you might just do person, and again, it depends on the country, what kind of tax arrangement you have. But it's always nice to provide an option to have all the company data for billing purposes. So it automatically will send invoice, but there is a bit of a setup for that. To do that, you need to have these additional things and a few changes. It's a very simple one. As you can see, we have the customer creation. If you want full billing and full invoices, which you do, you want to have customer creation always. Now, very few options when you don't want to have that, the entertainment projects and whatnot. You're sure it's just going to be a sort of B2C arrangement, if you will. But usually it's worth having the option at least. But this will create the sort of option. And then you want to have the tax ID collection. Now, this can get a bit troublesome. So we do have it enabled, we have it if supported, and then also have send invoice create options as enabled. This will automatically send the Stripe invoice. So we have those things enabled. Now, you can actually set custom fields within certain arrangements, especially when you create your own product directly in the dashboard. And just to collect that is quite important. but we'll have another video covering this specific arrangement, because some of it you might have to create within the dashboard, but for some of it there are options. However, this will actually force the tax ID collection, which may not be all that good if you just have a random person without a value added tax code, which will be required for Europe, and they will be entering zeros. And if you're in the States for accounting purposes, perhaps it's not important, perhaps it is important, but something to consider that some of these may not be so automatic. Just try with VPNs in your testing environment before you actually publish these things, so that random additional taxes don't get applied, and they actually work, and people who don't need to submit it, they don't have to submit it. There's something important to be checked here. So enabled, no, maybe, yes. If you want to do complete compliance, you require, if supported, and on different countries it will be supported, and on different selection of countries it won't be supported. And also it will depend on payment method and things of that nature. So just something to note in that regard. But that is how you change the sort of basic arrangement to this more tax adherent arrangement, and also invoice adherent arrangement. Now, you always want to do the invoices, so a low custom field never hurts, even if you don't really care about the specific tax, perhaps specification based on the region. At least you probably want to do a company name or something of that nature, because of course that will be a problem depending on the tool that you're actually selling, or a product that you're actually selling. Now, sometimes it will, sometimes no, but something to consider, because there's plenty of options. You can go this or that route, but do look into it and see what you can actually apply on this. Now, the next thing, very simple. We use Stripe. We want checkout sessions, create a sync. We take the options, as mentioned previously. The hard part is setting up the options. Actually creating the session, no, very easy. You just need to remember that we had this Stripe service. We use the checkout, we use the sessions, and we create a sync. And this important comment, this is 46 plus. So if you're working with maybe legacy versions, well, it would be time to upgrade. Probably not supported, but just something to consider. Versions do sort of matter. It's not as bad as some other platforms where they change every month or 2 months, but this is quite important. And other than that, we just link the order to the session just for further handling. But what the user cares about is the actual session URL, which you saw that. It gets redirected, and then that's where you pay, and then it will either get redirected to success or canceled. And after that, all that matters are the webhooks. So let's take a look at the webhooks now. So as mentioned previously, Stripe makes it very easy to set up your testing arrangements as well as your real-world arrangements. Unlike other software out there for payments, you don't have to get a third-party tool to redirect those webhooks to your actual computer in which you're working. Here it's quite simple and straightforward. Of course, there's no GUI, and that's to be expected, but at least they have their own arrangement to kind of do the whole redirection, so you don't need those third-party tools. You have a test with a local listener. Essentially, it's quite straightforward. Now, one thing to mention, you do the Stripe login, it will redirect. You need to be on your default browser, logged in essentially to your Stripe, and you need to have some kind of a setup for your test company essentially. So once you do that and you download that, that's an arrangement. And then you listen to whatever your endpoint is, and we'll look at the endpoints later on in the actual code. This is a webhook. Now it may be different to what you set up, but you will see them in the actual code. And of course, your local host may be completely different. So forward to it's a very important part to test out. Of course, on your local host, you'll just try your payments and do them, but you can actually trigger the events as well. So you can just send random events, see if they pass correctly, and or if they don't pass correctly, is it expected, is not expected. So you can do certainly all those things with that. But let's get into the actual real setup just a bit, just to see how it all works. And again, this is all testing data, test accounts and whatnot. Now we need to select the version that we want to do. And there's a few options here. Essentially, most of the time, you will probably use not the connected accounts, but your account, because that's how usually the stores work. There's many ways to arrange it, but for basic payments, usually that's what you'll go for. But you always want to go for the latest version. Now, in the code as well, you'll need to make sure everything is adhered to the latest version. So that's something quite important. And then another thing that's quite important, obviously you can select all, but then your essentially whatever you're running, your little API, and it will be little compared to the amount of data they can actually be sending for you, which you don't need almost none of it. The good thing is that they actually have a little filter. So for checkout, you'll want essentially all the checkout options ticked, and then a few payment things as well. So we have all the payments and things of that nature. Invoice paid alongside the checkout, invoice payment failed, invoice payment succeeded, invoice payment paid. You probably want to add those and some of these other ones perhaps. Intents don't matter. You just care about payment when it comes to the checkout. However, if you have on offer some of these other options, you may want to check them as well. But again, the main thing is the checkout. Then you want to see that the invoice is paid or it failed to be paid, because they kind of count the checkout payments as invoices and things of that nature. And maybe some additional data you might want to collect if that is available. But certainly, depending on the version as well, that's why we're not kind of getting into a detail of every little thing that you can check for this version, for the checkout that would be available, because they will change on versions. They do always, but you kind of want to make sure that you're taking that payment confirmation, not just a checkout confirmation, not just someone completed the checkout, but that actually the invoice was covered and you got paid and the money is there and you're good to go. So that's kind of important. So you have your latest version, and then you search for those events that actually matter, and then you go continue. Now, some options here, we're not going to get into those. We're dealing with a webhook today on our minimal API arrangement, very simple. Click continue on our webhook, and then we have our name. We do provide an automatic name for the testing purposes. We can certainly use that. The important thing, of course, when you do set things up, we won't be able to actually finish the setup because, of course, for testing, we are using the test CLI. But for your real application, you would need to input a real URL. Say, for example, like this, aidmarketing.biz. It's a great website for trying out your AI ads, generating them, saving them, and all that. But you put something like this and slash the payment finished or something like that, whatever your webhook setup is. So that is how you set up a webhook, and let's continue now with the rest of it. So we start with a bit of a trick on how you can move the actual minimal API endpoints out of the program.cs. As you can see, we have this little method from the app map webhook endpoints, map webhook endpoints essentially, and we'll have another class essentially where they all live. So nothing too fancy here, we just move it out of the file. But if you want to learn more about minimal APIs in general, how they're handled, and how the validation can be handled as well, which is quite an important topic for minimal APIs. You can watch some of the previous videos on this channel. Interesting topic. Now, sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. Again, as mentioned in those videos, Blazor Server side is probably a great candidate for having a little minimal API for whatever interaction, maybe user tracking, maybe a little maintenance arrangement, or maybe just that exposure to all those webhooks that you might need. But let's jump into the webhook endpoints, which is what the class is actually called. We have just a simple starter class and extension, this web app, sort of a trick. Nothing really interesting, and perhaps nothing to really consider in production. Perhaps it will work, perhaps not. But for all intents and purposes of this tutorial, this is a great sort of separation from all the mess in program.cs. Now, we take all the things that we would inject in program.cs anyways. There's no additional stuff, nothing like that. But the way we map them, it's quite simple. We map as post. If you want to use a controller, same thing. You have a controller, you have HTTP GET, and then whatever setup you had, we looked at those before. API webhooks in this case, maybe it would be different, maybe not. We looked at the great site 8marketing.biz. That one's also using Stripe for real actual payments, in that case subscriptions, but here we're just covering a very simple arrangement. But you should have your endpoint and then you have your data. The main thing is how you sort of interpret and read the data. So we don't want to mess around with it at all. We just use the read stream, the old-fashioned sort of arrangement. We get the JSON as string, so we get essentially the full text of it all. Now, the main thing with webhooks, and no matter what you do, there are more modern arrangements. You can, of course, extract the data right away from the text without bothering with this thing. But if it all fails, and you always need to consider that, and it's very important because you have versions, they get updated, they get created and all those things, and you can put as much logs as you want. And of course, these days, even if you don't have time, you can quite easily generate logs of Copilot and Visual Studio, and they will work great. However, they will not work at all if they don't have the whole body, because if you have a problem parsing the body, it may be quite easily to figure out what went wrong and what not. But if you don't have a body, you're all lost. You just know something went wrong. One of your users failed, the other succeeded, but you're in a mess because you don't have that. So it's very important to just start with pure string, pure separation, nothing more. Now, after that, we extrapolate, we at least try to extrapolate the actual event that happened, right? So we have here StripeEvent, we have event utility, and this is coming from Stripe. The NuGet package, stripe.net, this is directly from Stripe. We're not messing with some additional JSON parsing or anything like that. we just use event utility, ConstructEvent. From this, we know that it is the actual event that we want to work with. And that is very important because they send a lot of events. Some you want to handle, some you're set up to handle. We looked at all those checkboxes. So, of course, all of them will come, the ones that you check. But you need to handle the specific ones in a specific way. Obviously, not just parsing, but how you handle the data itself. Very important step. And then we use the Stripe signature. This is coming from the headers in this case, right? But you also have the Stripe signature, the webhook signature in your app settings. Well, for testing purposes, of course, we would not want to perhaps put them. You can, of course, and it can be perfectly safe as long as they're not exposed in repos and whatnot. And in chatbots these days, it's something quite important to consider. But this will compare to the one you have, and if it's all great and good, we can go and see right here we have a webhook secret. If it's all great and good, we'll go here and we'll check all those events and we'll take a look at that. Now we have a bunch of logs generated here. This is actually specifically generated with AI, nothing too fancy, and it creates a bit of noise, but that is kind of something to cover here, and that's why it was done this way. So we have all these logs and they're great, right? But as mentioned previously, and as mentioned previously as well, we can generate logs with AI these days, and great and good, but we want the data to come in, and at some point, if it all fails miserably, all completely fails. This is great. We log information, okay, we have a session at that point, but at some point, we also want to have a full exception where we log the whole JSON. Perhaps a bit cleared in some ways, but that's quite important, especially for testing. We need to have that because no amount of logs will help us if a payment fails and then we can't track the actual user. But let's get into the actual idea of reading these arrangements. So whatever the case here is, we need to have that selected in the webhook selection when we are creating the webhook. Checkout session completed means checkout session completed. We can pass it as session, as a completed session, specifically in this case. And we can check variables like fulfilled. So the orders, that's great, but the session itself, let's get into it a bit. It will have quite a few arrangements. And this is where the actual metadata will come in. So you have your customer ID, but customer ID is created by Stripe. That's the one created by Stripe. What you want to verify, actually, in this case, we might have something like this. Order ID, but you might have company ID, user ID, user of a company with certain values that created the order, whether we were allowed to create the order. And at the same time, for a sort of more complicated, perhaps, enterprise or just in general company working with permissions and whatnot directly, you want to see maybe they needed to have a certain permission. So at that point, maybe you want to issue a refund. If you do want to do that, well, that's a place to do that. If a person wasn't allowed, then you notify the company, maybe you ordered something for themselves. So that's where all this metadata comes in. And previously mentioned in the checkout creation, That's where we set it all up. Now, in the next videos, we'll try to cover a bit more about this stuff, perhaps the refunds, perhaps subscriptions, and obviously the product creation directly in Stripe, because you can create a product, especially if you have subscription services. It's better to just create a product in Stripe. You don't have to sort of code it into your own code. It's already going to be created, and then you can apply discounts. But there are some tricky bits with that as well. So we'll try to do a video on that in this week or next week, and it's gonna be quite interesting to see compared to this just basic straightforward arrangement. But again, the main important thing is you can create the checkout, but you need to pass metadata, and then here in the actual webhook endpoints, you need to verify it. If you don't verify it, you might be in a lot of trouble, and that's something to take home. Watch the videos on API endpoints, the minimal API endpoints, specifically in Blazor arrangements and other arrangements. The validation is quite interesting. There's also quite a few videos on this channel on MudBlazor. We're not specifically using this here, but MudBlazor is a great free library, so there's plenty of videos there. And of course, the code will be available as long as alongside rather other source codes on this channel on Patreon, and there's some free courses for certain subscription tiers, considering all the sort of perhaps more trickier stuff. There are a few more complicated videos there. And with that said, we'll conclude this video.